and welcome to our first webinar in the 2013 series on Resilient City Region Food Systems Policy. My name is Laura Kavanaugh from the Resilient Cities team at the ICLEI World Secretariat in Bonn, Germany, and I will be hosting the webinar for you today. First, a quick technical note. We will keep all participants muted for the duration of the session to minimize background noise. If you have a question or are having technical difficulties, please send us a message in the question chat box. For those of you who don't know ICLEI, let me start with a short introduction. ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, is a membership organization for local governments around the world with over 1,000 member cities in 84 countries. We promote local action for global sustainability and support cities from our global, regional, and country offices with targeted events. ICLEI convenes the annual Global Forum on Urban Resilience and Adaptation to Climate Change here in Bonn every spring ahead of the UNFCCC talks. These webinars focus on a selection of key themes from our 2013 Resilient Cities Forum, showcasing selected speakers from the forum and additional local government representatives. The webinars build on conversations begun at the conference, keeping the dialogue going and providing a resource to those unable to attend by looking ahead to 2014. I would like to mention for those of you interested in contributing to next year's Congress program that our call for contributions is currently open online and will remain so until November 30th. You may wish to submit on the topic of food or on one of the many other topics related to urban resilience and adaptation. In today's webinar, we will discuss the development and implementation of policies that support a resilient city region food system. Our agenda includes 3 presentations totaling 45 minutes, followed by a 10 to 15-minute Q&A session. Stanley Visser will begin with the experience of the City of Cape Town, which has recently commissioned a study on urban food systems and food insecurity to inform emerging policies. Lauren Baker will then share lessons learned from the 20-year history of the Toronto Food Policy Council, focusing on 3 initiatives in particular. Marielle Dubling from the RUA Foundation will respond to both presentations with a global perspective on food system policies and discuss the resources available through the City Food Network. Please hold your questions until the end. You can type them in as we go along, and we will read them out at the end. When doing so, please indicate which speaker the question is for, and if you like, the name of your organization. As previously mentioned, please also type in any technical questions so we can help you sort them out. To get things started with a brief introduction to the topic of resilient urban food systems, I will now pass over to my colleague, Alice Balbo, Congress Officer for Resilient Cities. Alice?
Thanks, Laura, for your introduction. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Alice Balbo, and I'm the Resilient Cities Project Officer, and I would like to once again welcome you to the first Resilient Cities webinar of the 2013 series. When talking about the resilience of a city and its systems, food is definitely a crucial issue. Increasing urbanization and climate change are challenging the entire market chain of food, and there is the need to bring the food conversation into a more holistic and comprehensive approach. It is with this reality in mind and in this framework that last June, as part of the Resilient Cities 2013 Congress, a Resilient Urban Food Systems Forum was organized by ICLEI in cooperation with Plantagon International, RUA Foundation, FAO, START, IFOAM, the UNEP Think Eat Save Initiative, Welthungerhilfe, and IUFN. The Resilient Urban Food Systems Forum saw the participation of 2 of our speakers today, Lauren Baker and Marielle Dubling. The outcomes and suggestions from the discussions, case studies, workshops, and dialogues with over 70 interdisciplinary actors present at the forum have been analyzed and condensed in a report highlighting opportunities, challenges, and solutions for resilient urban food systems. I invite you to check this report, available on the Resilient Cities website under Congress Publications. As most of you know from your own work experience, cities act in the field of food security and urban agriculture, and there are several examples of successful city food strategies in different local governments. We're going to listen to 2 of these in this webinar. However, there are still several challenges and gaps for cities that have not yet started or are about to start to work in this field. It is to address these challenges and gaps that ICLEI and RUA Foundation launched at the Resilient Cities 2013 Congress last June, the City Food Network on Resilient City Region Food Systems and Urban Agriculture, that Marielle Dubeling will be describing in her intervention later on this webinar. I will now leave you to Laura and our speakers, and I would like to thank you in advance for your participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. Now, please allow me to introduce our first presenter, Stanley Visser, as he sets up his presentation. Stanley is an economist who has been working for the city of Cape Town for the past 16 years. He hails from an agricultural background and started his career as a teacher before moving on to become an economic development planner and policy advisor. In his current position, as head development facilitation, he is responsible for investment facilitation and urban agriculture. Flowing from his experience in policy development and urban agriculture, he was recently assigned as project manager to lead the study on food systems and food security in Cape Town, which he will tell us a little more about in his presentation. Stanley, you have the floor if you are ready. There's a slight delay from Cape Town.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get my presentation on the screen.
We see it coming in. It's loading now. Yeah. There we go.
So
we can see it.
It's there. I can start talking. Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Maybe for some people in Toronto it's good morning. I'm Stanley Visser from City of Cape Town, and I would like to talk just briefly about the initiative in Cape Town. Currently, South Africa, no city has a formal citywide food security policy or strategy. A number of cities do have elements of such in place. However, the concern is that these, some of them are really just tokenism responses, is seen as enough has been done in terms of food security, and it's obviously not the case. So in Cape Town we have realized that, and we are now coming up with a comprehensive approach to what should the city's response be to food system planning and food security. Just a brief profile of the City of Cape Town. Broadly speaking, one can say we are from the most southern point of Africa. Table Mountain has recently, our iconic mountain has recently been voted as one of the 7 global natural wonders. We have got a population of 3.8 million people, and for the last decade to 15 years we have grown between 30 to 46%. You will see from 96 to 2011 we grew with 46%. So we do have rapid urbanization, and it's mostly poor unemployed rural migrants that are coming to Cape Town, both from South Africa and even beyond from other southern African countries. The number of poor people in the City of Cape Town is about 25% of our residents, nearly 1 million. And if we say people in poverty, we say it's a household where the income is less than 3,500 rand per month. Cape Town is also one of the preferred investment regions in Africa. We've got excellent economic infrastructure, road, sea, air, and IT connections. And then, of course, we are one of the world's most popular tourism destinations. This is just a view of Cape Town with a Table Mountain in the background for those people that have not been to Cape Town. And then also Cape Town is not only beautiful, we also have a lot of poor people staying in the city. The current status of food planning in South Africa is as follows. You have to understand our political administrative system. We've got 3 spheres of government, a national, a provincial, and a local government spheres. And the political administrative structure of South Africa designates split responsibilities for food and food security between the various spheres of governments and even departments. So say within a national government, food security and food is the responsibility of at least 3 or 4 departments. Then this split designation of responsibilities creates unclear mandates, confusion, conflict, and ad hoc interventions. So we address in some cases the symptoms and not the root causes of food system failures. On a national level, there is up to 25% of the people that are not food secure. There is an ad hoc approach to food planning on national level, no systemic approach. Food are seen as a rural issue with the focus on production, and little consideration is given to urban food challenges. So we are a bit behind. We think it's still a rural issue only, or mostly. New food policies and strategies are being formulated at national level, but it's still hampered by the fact that there's no lead department on national level. Currently, the National Department of Agriculture is leading, but on the same hand, Department of Social Development says, but we should lead. If agriculture leads, the focus is on production. If social development leads, it's more on interventions like food passes and those type of things. Then specific challenges for City of Cape Town. There's a general lack of knowledge and understanding of food regarding food system issues and opportunities. There is some understanding, but there's no comprehensive understanding. Does the current food systems respond to the needs of the rapidly expanding city? As you've seen, we grew by 46%, and that most of the growth took place in the poor areas. For example, some of the neighborhoods, the people there grew by more than 300% in the last 15 years. Unclear mandate and competency for local government. It's not clear in our constitution exactly what the roles and responsibilities of local government is in terms of the constitution. Then there's a lack of comprehensive information on food system activities and issues such as food insecurity. We know there are food insecure people in Cape Town, but we don't know how many people, and we are not often sure where it's happening or where are the people located that are hungry. What should be so our fundamental question is that what should be the response of the city to food governance, meaning food planning, regulation, food security interventions, etc. We are seeking to see how to allow the integration of food into urban governance and strategic planning. Which department should be the main driver? We've got the same question in Cape Town as a national one. Who should be which department should be responsible for or driving food planning in the city? Then the city's emerging response. We realize that an integrated, systematic and holistic approach is necessary. Food is everyone's business responsibility. You can't say that the Constitution does not give you that competency or responsibility. It's everyone's business. Involvement, meaning active participation and commitment of all relevant role players, would be necessary if we want to address the food system in Cape Town. So we are also embarking on a process of multi-stakeholder participatory planning. Internally, all relevant line functionaries should commit to contribute to a joint food policy and its uptake in their respective policies and programs. So if we say this is the direction, or these are the responsibilities of the city in terms of food planning and food security, then the line departments should understand their roles and also provide budgets and strategic plans for that. The Council has then subsequently, the Council has commissioned a comprehensive study on food systems and food security to inform its firm and decisive response to food system governance and food system failures, meaning how are we going to mainstream food planning. The objective of the study, and we have commissioned the University of Cape Town to carry out the study for us, and the main objectives of the study are as follows: to obtain a proper understanding of the various elements and interdependencies and challenges of the food system. As I've said earlier, there's not a clear understanding amongst everyone what is a food system, what are the different elements and the activities within each element. We do have, for example, environmental health officers looking after food safety. We've got the urban agricultural unit looking after growing your own food, but there's no comprehensive understanding by everyone. To obtain a detailed understanding of the extent and depth of urban food insecurity and the drivers or the triggers thereof, and how City Act and especially the Council should respond to it. There are some responses, but they are ad hoc, they are not coordinated, so we need to get to a situation where we act as a collective so that we can make a real impact. Then also establish a priority list of key problems and challenges in the food system and develop a response and action plan to each one of them. That will mean that we will identify the challenges. Some of them will be addressed by the city, others by provincial government, others by national government. There's a role for private sector, there's a role for NGOs, civil society in this whole systematic approach to provide impetus for mobilization of Cape Townians around food issues. Food planning to become a part of overall development planning. The study is structured as follows. There are 6 modules, and the first one is to food system review and conceptual framework. Then to food policy and food systems governance analysis. And coping strategies is the third one. We will also look at the food basket analysis. We know in Cape Town that the food basket is different in the different communities. In poorer communities, it's different from the more affluent areas, and also we've got cultural differences, so we need to understand the food basket of the poor especially. Stakeholder analysis to see exactly who are the role players in the food planning, who can influence food planning and who are affected by food planning and all the activities we envisage to carry out. So at the end, to identify the identification of priority areas and possible intervention points. And as I've said, it will be a matrix of different role players to do different things so that we don't duplicate, but that we align and coordinate. The policy formulation process. First of all, the issue or the problem statement was identified, and it came from the mayor's office. So this food system study has the highest importance in the city. We need to develop a conceptual framework to guide the study. Then we do a situational analysis in terms of the players, data, assessment of existing policies and strategies. There will be multi-stakeholder consultation and participatory planning. Collectively, we will agree on interventions and priorities. The full council will eventually approve the food policy and action agenda, or of course they can reject it. But the expectation is that they will approve it, and then we will implement, monitor, and evaluate. Of course, there are a few critical success factors, or we can also call it risks. To get all role players excited and committed is not that easy, but it is dependent on that we all work together. Then the ability and commitment of all critical role players to accommodate food issues and responsibilities in their policy, strategies and programs. It's one thing to talk about and agree about what should be done. It's another thing to make sure that it's absorbed into your annual and longer term planning as well as in your budgets. Support for a systematic and integrated approach, meaning that we should not work in silos and not work in isolation on the different levels or spheres of government. We need to work together. Due to the complexity of the food policy planning, there is a need for phased and incremental approach. By that I mean that we will identify a whole range of things that has to be done, but we will start with the critical ones, and over time we will get to the other things that also needs to be done. And with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Stanley. Now we'll continue on, and just a reminder to type in any questions that you may have for Stanley or in general into the question box so that we can answer them at the end. Also, if you have any examples that come to mind that you would like to share, you can also put those in the box so that we can share them with the audience later as well. I would like to now introduce our second speaker, Lauren Baker. Lauren is the coordinator of the Toronto Food Policy Council at Toronto Public Health and the City of Toronto. She is the Vice Chair of Food Secure Canada, a network of civil society organizations and individuals collaborating to advance dialogue and cooperation for policies and programs that improve food security in Canada and globally. Lauren has a PhD in Environmental Studies from York University. She teaches at the University of Toronto, and she is the author of Corn Meets Maize, Food Movements and Markets in Mexico. Lauren, please go ahead when you're ready with your presentation.
Thank you very much. Can you see my presentation, Laura? I'll assume that all is well.
Yes, we can.
Great, great. Well, wonderful to be here. Good morning from Toronto. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and to ICLEI for the invitation to be part of this webinar. Stanley, thank you for your presentation. It was fantastic to hear about your work and also see, in fact, how many challenges we share through what you described. In my presentation, I'm going to briefly talk about the context of our work, the history, the food policy trajectory, and the history of Toronto's food policy work. And then I'd like to spend a few minutes describing some specific initiatives that are priorities for us right now. In Toronto, like many cities, we're a dense urban area surrounded now by a green belt, and that's a significant feature of our urban food sheds, so to speak. In terms of our urban development, we're a very rapidly urbanizing city. We have some of the most intensive development and construction in North America. At one point I heard a statistic that we have more cranes in downtown Toronto than Chicago and LA combined. So we have a rapidly urbanizing and increasingly dense urban core, especially along our transit corridors. The Greenbelt, I won't spend a lot of time describing, but it has driven quite a focus on regional food systems planning that I'll describe later. And two important features of our Greenbelt are the specialty crop areas, the Niagara tender fruit specialty crop area that is down along the bottom edge of the map, and our Holland Marsh, which is a specialty vegetable production area just to the north of the city. And so the Greenbelt has done a lot to protect those crop areas, and of course relates directly to the food security of Toronto. Like Stanley described, we face a similar context to many cities. I call it the double imperative for city regions related to food systems. The first imperative being our jurisdictional fragmentation. And so like many cities, most of the food systems jurisdictional responsibilities are actually upstream, lying with the federal and provincial levels orders of government, while the municipal order of government takes care of many of the downstream areas like land use planning, food safety, nutrition, waste collection, economic development, and social development. And so the other imperative is the context of downloading. So increasingly globally, cities are required to take on more responsibility with fewer dollars. So in our work, we ask the question, instead of asking what food can do for this, what the city can do for food, we ask what food can do for the city. And I think that this is a critical distinction. So we try and think about how food can be embedded in the rest of the city priorities and be integrated into employment and economic development priorities, into our priorities related to healthy food delivery, community development, environmental sustainability, waste reduction, and health promotion, all key priorities for the City of Toronto. And we can weave policies, policy and food systems thinking and food systems lens through other policy documents. Of course, as I mentioned, Toronto has over time recognized that the city is embedded within a regional food sector. Just to give an example of that, last week, just before our Canadian Thanksgiving, Toronto City Council passed a motion unanimously recognizing Toronto as a food and water first city. And that relates to a provincial campaign to reform our Aggregates Act to protect farmland, Class 1 farmland in the province. So it was quite a symbolic gesture to have the City of Toronto step up and become a food and water first city. And in fact, the food system and food security is written into our official plan as it relates to farmland protection and preservation in the region. So municipalities are acting on complex food issues. Their efforts are not designed necessarily to feed the city, but rather to shift systems dynamics to promote a whole range of improvements. And that quote comes from a recent study that we did on municipal food policy across Canada to better understand how this trend was unfolding in city regions across the country. And we were very surprised by the proliferation of food policy initiatives across the country. Just to come back to Toronto, the Toronto case, I want to talk a little bit about the food policy arc that the City of Toronto has taken. Our food policy work is really grounded and has its roots in the Ottawa Charter for Health Promotion. The charter was endorsed in 1986. It was a WHO initiative related to health promotion. It relates to the increasing discussion right now around health in all policies. And the charter, if you can actually spend some time looking at that little swirly graphic, I think it really framed the approach that we take in Toronto related to food policy. A participatory approach, an approach that works in collaboration with communities, and an approach that's grounded and embedded in healthy public policy. As a result of the Ottawa Charter and this focus on health promotion, the Toronto Food Policy Council was formed in 1991. One of the first activities of the Food Policy Council was to bring together Food and Hunger Action Committee, which brought city councillors, people from civil society, and city staff together to understand the food system in Toronto and issues related to food security. From that process, Toronto endorsed the Toronto Food Charter in 2001, and then most recently we have endorsed the Toronto Food Strategy, and this has meant a real shift in and increased capacity for food systems work in the City of Toronto. There's now a whole team that I work with to implement the Toronto Food Strategy, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. The Toronto Food Policy Council, as I mentioned, was started in 1991 by Toronto City Council to really look at the root causes of hunger in our city. Our mandate is to advise and support Toronto Public Health and City Council in the development of food security and food systems policies and programs, to advocate for innovative community food security programs, to foster dialogue across the food system with the community and with the city, and now to act as the reference group for the Toronto Food Strategy. And of course, as I mentioned, related to farmland preservation, our work, we see our work as embedded in the broader policy context of the city, and we try and bring food systems perspective into the development of various city policy priorities. So as I mentioned, the official plan, we have a very strong priority right now related to neighborhood development and social development. Our local food procurement work is based in Toronto's environmental plan as part of our climate change mitigation strategy. Our urban agriculture work relates partially to our new parks plan. And of course, our regional planning work that I'll describe in a few minutes is embedded in our economic development strategy for the city. In the report that I mentioned, we try and articulate the strategies, the overarching strategies that are used in municipal and regional food policy work. And we're trying to be very deliberate about the kind of process that we use for developing food policy in Toronto. And so what we observed through our analysis of food policy development in Canada was that these initiatives really create spaces for a full range of actors to discuss complex problems and solutions, that they're designing interventions that have a strong possibility of success. So like Stanley mentioned, this is incremental work, and also these initiatives are leveraging resources across systems to drive implementations, that many people are bringing their resources, financial or otherwise, to the table to make the interventions move forward. So this work is really about framing food systems as part of a broader urban agenda, urban and regional agenda, about brokering relationships and collaboration, and about leveraging resources across the system. I put in this slide from our report. I do like it. I sort of think of it as the wheel of fortune, with city departments and municipal responsibilities in the middle, and many food systems actions that are being taken in municipalities across Canada, from charters to health promotion to mobile markets to business planning and retention strategies, and the many people and actors that are involved in our food system. So now I'll shift and speak briefly about some of the policy priorities that we have in Toronto. I'll talk about the food strategy, and we have a long presentation about a food strategy implementation, very exciting. I'll focus on increasing access, our work on increasing access to healthy food. Then I'll talk about our regional planning initiative, urban agriculture, and very briefly a new initiative that we're working on with Marielle, actually at RUAF and the City of Cape Town, with Stanley's participation. The Toronto Food Strategy was endorsed in 2010 by Board of Health, spearheaded by Toronto Public Health in 2008 to help align the Toronto policies and bylaws in relation to a healthy, sustainable food system, and also to support residents and community organizations in the food solutions that they want to implement in their neighborhoods. So it has a really neighborhood focus. One of our first initiatives with the food strategy has been healthy food retail mapping to better understand food access challenges for residents in Toronto. And like many urban areas, we do have parts of the city where there are overlapping challenges related to proximity to fresh fruit and vegetables. We, in this case, use supermarkets as a proxy for that. Access to transportation and density of low-income residents. So you can see there are some areas across the city where we have those overlapping challenges, and then we are focusing our work in those communities. Here's one example. Lowtherton Parkway is just to the north west of the downtown core, and you can see it's apartment and condo complexes. The only food retail is one convenience store, and the nearest supermarket is 2.5 kilometers if you take the streets to walk directly there. However, many residents climb this fence to get over the train tracks, because then, of course, the proximity is much closer. So this is the kind of food access challenges people face in Toronto. As a response, we're piloting a mobile good food market with many partners, Food Share being one of them. And so this van, and very soon a retrofitted transit bus, old transit bus, will be visiting neighborhoods across the city and providing fresh fruit and vegetables in those communities. So this has been a very interesting initiative, very well received in the City of Toronto by residents, and our communities have been really engaged in doing outreach for this initiative and speaking to residents about what they would like to see on the truck on the mobile good food market. I think just quickly of note, our relationship with Food Share in their ability to deliver many of the initiatives that we start is key and central to Toronto's food policy story, and so I can answer questions about that later. Also part of our work around access to healthy food, we're doing research on Toronto's food retail environment with the hopes of starting a healthy corner stores project very soon, and we're just looking now for champions, retail champions, and thinking about the kinds of incentives we'll use in Toronto to work with retailers, small convenience store owners, to offer more healthy food. And we're also working with local farmers and agricultural stakeholders to think about how we can get more locally grown world crops into our neighborhood retail as well. This is a huge market. There's a huge demand in Toronto for crops from immigrant communities that aren't typically grown in the Greater Toronto area. I'd also like to talk about briefly the Golden Horseshoe Farming Action Plan. I think this is a very interesting initiative, a very new initiative. The Food and Farming Action Plan was endorsed by Toronto City Council as well as the 6 other regional and municipal governments in the Golden Horseshoe last year. And of course, it was a very collaborative process to develop the action plan, and now we're in the implementation phase. 2 quick points about implementation. The first is that we have brought together staff from planning, economic development, and public health to sit at a working group table and work together on common food systems issues. And this, of course, is very significant. It's very unusual for us to speak as public staff, even to economic development and planners within the City of Toronto, let alone to speak to our colleagues regionally. First initiatives with this action plan has been to undertake a food asset mapping exercise, and so all the participating municipalities contributed their data related to farming and food processing in the region as the first step, and so now we have that data compiled. It's a very important economic development tool, and we'll be layering on some of the social development aspects like urban farms, community gardens, community food centers. We'll be layering those elements onto this food assets map over time. Next week, we have a report going to a Parks and Environment Committee related to urban agriculture. And what is being proposed for urban agriculture is an agriculture program for the City of Toronto. This initiative grew out of the Urban Agriculture Action Plan that you see on the screen, which was a collaboration between city staff and community stakeholders. The report that's going forward next week is the city's response about what the City of Toronto can do and city staff can do to support the implementation of this action plan. So that's very exciting. One of the outcomes to drive this new program forward will be a city stakeholder steering committee that will think about the governance of or the shape of the program, what will be the key elements of the and priorities for this new program over the short term, how will it be resourced in the long term. And finally, I wanted to mention to all of you on the webinar that with RUAF, municipal partners, Ryerson University, we are developing a course related to municipal food policy and practice, a professional development workshop that is geared towards capacity building and strengthening city-level capacity for food systems policy and action. We're developing core workshop content, and that will be available online through Ryerson, but also through workshops in particular cities, and also developing case studies on food systems work that Toronto, Cape Town, Nairobi, and several other cities are undertaking to understand the food systems approach and also to explore specific themes like food security and housing, local food procurement, student nutrition, and regional food systems planning. So we're very excited about this new initiative and the opportunity to work outside again of our municipal borders with regional and global partners. So in conclusion, just 3 points. I think our work has really focused over time about building relationships across scales, sectors, and jurisdictions, and understanding the complex linkages, policy linkages across scales, sectors, and jurisdictions. We have really focused in our work in Toronto on creating opportunities for people to participate in policy and decision-making processes, and really this has focused on the creation of new food systems governance models, as we're seeing with the Greater Golden Horseshoe Food and Farm Action Plan, a regional governance model, and through the work of the Toronto Food Policy Council, a collaborative participatory planning structure and community engagement opportunity. So thank you very much again. I'll end there and look forward to our discussion.
Thank you very much, Lauren. And we will now turn to our commentator, Marielle Dooling. Marielle is the director of RUAF Foundation International Network of Resource Centers on Urban Agriculture and Food Security. Marielle has long experience in policy advising and training on urban and peri-urban agriculture. She currently coordinates the RUAF involvement in the UN Habitat Program on integrating urban and peri-urban agriculture and forestry in climate and city climate change programs, and acts as the research coordinator for a project on monitoring impacts of urban agriculture and forestry, climate change adaptation and mitigation. Let me just load your presentation here, Marielle, and I will pass it over to you.
Thank you, Lauren. Good morning, good afternoon to all presenters and to all people who are attending. We're looking forward to your comments and questions. As I was very well introduced, next please. Next slide, please.
Has it changed?
I'm working, yeah, it has changed, thanks. So I'm directing the RUAF Foundation. We're active in the field of urban and peri-urban agriculture and urban city regional food systems since 1998. And work in different research projects, policy and multi-stakeholder planning projects together with about 30 cities around the world, whom we support in policy formulation, but also project design, implementation, and very important capacity development. Next slide, please. As already illustrated by the previous two speakers, urban agriculture and urban food systems are a growing reality. There's policies at national and local level that are emerging, that are growing in number, that are growing in scope, and at the same time this also implies an increasing demand for support from cities around the world in the theme of urban food systems. And this was evident in the Bonn Declaration of Mayors, which was signed in June 2013, where they call for development and implementation of holistic approaches to city food systems, linked to objectives like food security, urban poverty eradication, biodiversity, and that are integrated in development plans. Next slide, please. These emerging experiences from different cities bring together different lessons, and I would like to highlight a couple of them. I think Lauren's presentation by Toronto already showed that food is often seen as a driver for other policy objectives. She mentioned tourism, she mentioned health, she mentioned, of course, food security, job creation, involvement of youth, productive, so agricultural green spaces in the city are also known to play a crucial role in urban biodiversity and outdoor recreation. And more recently, urban and peri-urban agriculture and forestry, but also food, are recognized as an important dimension of and as an important strategy for disaster risk reduction and adaptation to climate change. Also, there is an important link between waste and wastewater management, so the recycling of urban nutrients and urban resources in localized agriculture. Next slide, please. Another important lesson learned is that these changes are concept for urban planning. And Stanley Visser from Cape Town already highlighted that, mentioned that, is that we need a new approach to urban planning. One more, please, Laura. The slide doesn't show it. We need an approach to urban planning which takes into account the planning of green spaces, so physical and green infrastructure that are designed together with urban infrastructure. And in doing so, we also need to take into account, both Lauren and Stanley highlighted, the jurisdictional conflicts and boundaries. So this calls for planning across boundaries. Our approach to the design of urban food strategies, starting from those two hypotheses of lessons learned, is to establish a core group of committed local partners with political support. This was both shown in Toronto in the form of a Toronto Food Policy Council. It can also take the form of a multi-stakeholder working group or a food working group. As any planning process, it's very important to start from the mapping and analysis of the food system. And this was as done, for example, in Cape Town, where we look at the food basket, where we look at specific vulnerable groups, where we look where food is produced, transported, and processed, when we look to the link between food and other sectoral policies. And based on such assessment, to go into a process of visioning, scenario building, and definition of urban food strategies, that will create the legal, operational, and financial framework for coordinated actions. Next slide, please. This approach is being implemented in several cities around the world, and we can learn from them some elements of successful city food strategies. For example, the integration into city planning and zoning or building standards, preferential public food procurement. Governments have a high buying power in terms of being able to buy local produced food for offices, for hospitals, for schools. The promotion of multifunctional agriculture is practiced in between cities. The use of smart and local food labels. Education and learning on good and healthy food linked to consumption and nutrition, but also the reduction of food waste and linking to food banks. This is done, for example, next slide please, in Bristol, in the UK, where food waste, or rather say food that is thrown away by supermarkets, is given to food banks and vulnerable groups. There's examples of cities like Antananarivo in Madagascar and Colombo in Sri Lanka who integrate urban agriculture and climate change adaptation programs. Increasing research on appropriate technologies, for example, for greening buildings, for rooftop gardens, for growing in floodplains, and various examples like Toronto, Vancouver, Cape Town is starting on forming food policy councils. Next slide, please. Important success factors are sufficient time for fact-finding and trusting partnerships, continued political support, so in order not to depend on a specific mayoral period, specific media attention and public dialogue. I think Toronto with all the brochures and media is a very good example. We already mentioned multi-stakeholder involvement. Looking at all stages of the food chain and inclusion of different policy domains and optimal use of available resources of all partners at all levels, local, national, and provincial. Next slide, please. Also, early implementation, I think, shown by Toronto. Start with concrete interventions like the mobile booth food market to keep the people engaged, to keep the consumers engaged, to be able to do media attention. Combine that with the creation of a facilitating legal framework and longer-term plans. And take into account potential health risks. So also not only look at the positive impacts, but also potential risks of growing food more locally. Proper documentation and sharing of results and costs. So what is the city doing in terms of city food strategies, and communicate that to different organizations, and clear monitoring. Next slide, please. What do we want to achieve with the city food action plan? What are indicators, and how to periodically measure the result of the different strategies that have been put into place. Next to the important success factors, there are also some recommendations. I think Stanley Visser from Cape Town highlighted the importance of specifically including a focus on urban food security and nutrition and urban agriculture into not only local but also international agenda. So increased recognition for the importance of urban food strategy. This goes hand in hand with the need for increased local and international financing. Training technical assistance. I think Laura from Toronto gave a good example in the new project. The development of guidelines and tools how to do a food system assessment, how to draw a city food policy or strategy, and enhance opportunities for linking and learning amongst cities, like what we're doing now in this webinar. Next slide, please. So for these reasons, in order to address these recommendations and also gaps, Alice at the start already mentioned that ICLEI and RUAF launched the City Food Network. And actually this webinar is also one of the first activities of this network in order to share information more broadly. And we are also working on a city hub, which will be an internet portal where you can find information on different cities in the global north and south working on urban food strategies, and that will give a description on the city itself, on some general data on the urban food system, but also on the initiatives, the projects, the plans, and the policies they're undertaking, with links to a database where you can download that information. That website will also feature possibilities for further exchange. We'll have a database of fact sheets and business models and tools. And this City Food Network will also continue to provide training and technical support to cities and organize city-to-city exchanges and collaborate in international awareness raising and lobbying. We're still looking for further funding for this network, but if cities are interested to participate in this network, then please contact us with an expression of interest, and we may look at the possibilities of already starting up a support service to a specific city. Next slide, please. Actually, yeah, this was very short, my presentation. As I said, please contact Alice or myself for further information. And I'm handing over back to Laura for the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marielle, for your intervention and your presentation. That was very helpful. We're going to now move onto a brief question and answer session. If we don't get to your question, we will be able to forward them on to the speakers after the session. So to start off here, we have a question for Lauren from Hrun Gudmundsdottir, and asking, how do you deal with issues of food safety when growing food in urban areas? Safety in terms of plant uptake of air and water pollutants.
Thank you for that question. Actually, I have a resource to point you to, which is a soil assessment guide that our public health team at Toronto Public Health have developed. It's very enabling of urban agriculture and urban growing. It's a red, yellow, green light approach to assessing your soil, and takes you through the steps of doing an assessment of the land that you're going to grow on, looking at the previous uses of that property, the soil testing if that's necessary, and then guiding you through appropriate plant material choices if you are going to grow food on land that is perhaps a yellow light, gets a yellow light. So you can look that up on Toronto Public Health's website. I'll post the link later, and I think if you do a search for Soil Assessment Guide, Toronto Public Health, you'll find it. It was just recently nominated for an award related to brownfields and the regeneration of brownfields in Toronto. So I'm happy to forward that resource to you.
Thank you, Lauren. I have a second question for you, Lauren, and also for a follow-up for Stanley. Niraja Havilgiri asks, Lauren, have productive home gardens been considered as a proxy along with or instead of supermarkets while evaluating access to food? And Stanley, Niraja is also asking, how are food baskets evaluated? So Lauren, maybe you can answer the first and Stanley will jump in for the second.
When we were first undertaking our food strategy assessment, we did food asset mapping for neighborhoods across the city, and in that case, absolutely, we were mapping gardens, mainly community gardens, but also in some cases backyard gardens as well. So those were captured on our neighborhood food asset maps. In our more recent work around urban agriculture, we're creating an inventory where it will be possible for people to submit their home gardens into a map. And so we'll get really a complete picture of the amount of food and the area of urban land that's being used for food production. In the city right now, it's really hard, of course, to capture that. So we've already mapped all the city-supported gardens and urban farms in Toronto, and the next phases of the inventory will be to open that up for people in the community to post their own gardening activities. And then finally, in that last phase of the inventory, we'll be identifying land that's suitable, new land that's suitable for gardening. So it's kind of a yes and no answer to your question. We're trying to find that information. Of course, it's very difficult, and we did not use it in our analysis of access to healthy food. But of course, that analysis is limited in our use of supermarkets as a proxy.
Stanley, did you have an answer regarding how food baskets are evaluated?
I will just give an opinion. I do not have a clear-cut answer, but the issue is that in our context in Cape Town is that people have to buy their food. Most of the people have to buy the food. So food price inflation is first of all for us an issue. For example, currently the high crude oil price has got a direct impact on food prices in South Africa because of the fuel price that's going up, the transport cost, because most of the food are transported long distance. So, and then also what we want to do with the food basket, if I can answer for that angle, we need to understand whether people are eating enough, whether the food is safe or whether it's healthy food that they are eating, and then in terms of a balanced diet. So we are trying to get the understanding. That's where we are at the moment. What are the people eating? Is it enough? Is it healthy? Is it safe? And then we can start, and I know now in the poorer areas that the food baskets will not comply with these criteria. So what interventions should we do? For example, we have already get from our health department on the safe preparation of food and those type of things.
Thank you, Stanley. And a second question here from Dana Kapiltonova asking, what led to the commissioning of the study, and where is the budget for the study coming from?
There was a realization, or let me take a step back. Certain studies were done, or surveys were done in Cape Town. For example, the University of Cape Town or AFSAN, they did some studies in 4 wards of us, poor areas where it was determined that 68% of the people are food insecure in this poor neighborhood, and another 12% is also living on the edge of food insecurity. So from those, for example, that studies or surveys inform us that there's a problem, though it's to a certain extent invisible to the city decision makers, but the politicians realize that there's a growing problem. So we, from the city side, we are funding the study, but we are working together with our provincial Department of Agriculture. They are, we have convinced them to fund half of the study cost. So the city, we are providing on the budget for this study and also for the outcomes of the study, and we will solicit or we will leverage money and cooperation from other role players.
Thank you, Stanley. We're coming to the end of our time. I'm going to ask one more question. This is directed towards Marielle, but others might be able to respond as well, from Isabelle Lacour. She says that our focus is on public service as a lever to implement sustainable food systems and to get in touch with a large range of the population. And are there any speakers that have had experience with this that could offer some suggestions? Marielle, are you?
Sorry, can you please repeat the question? It was.
Yes. The question is, this organization is their focus on public food service, a lever to implement sustainable food systems, and to get in touch with a large range of the population. And if you had any experience or advice.
Thank you. There's a couple of cities in Latin America who started to approach food systems from the public food service. This is specifically the case also for Rosario in Argentina and for Lima in Peru. And I can provide further context. If people send me an email.
Okay, thank you. Any other final thoughts from the panelists before we wrap up the brief discussion session here?
This is Marielle again. I just would like to repeat our request to people that if they know of cities or if they themselves are working for cities and do the urban food systems assessment and planning, please send us a contact and we would be interested in following up and also featuring your experiences and plans on the city hub that the City Food Network is working on.
Good. And I apologize that we didn't get to everyone's questions, but we will be able to forward those on to the speakers so that we can continue some of this after the webinar. So with that, I would like to conclude our first webinar of the 2013 series. We'd like to give a warm thank you to Stanley, Lauren, and Marielle for sharing their thoughts and experiences, and to all of you for attending and engaging with us, and I hope you have some takeaway points to bring back. We have been recording the webinar, and it will be made available on our website shortly together with the presentations. And I would like to invite you to our subsequent webinars in the 2013 series. Our next webinar is mostly full. There might be a few spaces left. It's coming next Tuesday. But following that, on November 5th, will be our webinar on community-based adaptation, registration for which will open next week. And please see our website for more information and for the full schedule of webinars. And lastly, I'd like to remind you about the open call for contributions for next year's Resilient Cities Congress, which closes November 30th. And Resilient Cities 2014 will be held from May 29th to May 31st in Bonn, Germany. I hope to see some or all of you there. Thank you all for joining us and have a lovely evening or day.